Hello, welcome back to my channel. Today I'm covering the events of 2021 2022 in regards to World War III, the Taliban takeover in 2021, Russia invading Ukraine 2022, and China-Taiwan relations escalating with China sending airplanes into the Taiwan zone in 2022. The Taliban took over Afghanistan in August 16 of 2021. It took about 10 days, and it was a drawback for US troops and for the terrorist group of Taliban to resurge back onto the scene in Afghanistan as a ruling party. The US-led invasion of Afghanistan in 2001 ousted the insurgents from power, but they never left. After the blitz across the country in recent days, the Western-backed government that had run the country for 20 years collapsed. Afghans, fearing for the future, raced to the airport, one of the last routes out of the country, AP News reported in 2021. From the Dnieper River over to the Russian border, all of eastern Ukraine would be destroyed by these 8 American nuclear missiles. Russia was going to invade Ukraine, and there would be a Holocaust against the Jews. Phillip Barnett in 2007. Phillip Barnett is a pastor prophet that came out of Ukraine with this vision given to him by our Lord Jesus Christ. He's a Christian pastor, and he gave this vision to Ukrainians back in 2007 that Russia will invade eastern Ukraine and that people will need to evacuate and go to the western border. And when Russia invades, America will retaliate by sending 8 nuclear weapons into eastern Ukraine, and also that Russia, after when they invade, they will be killing the Jews in the eastern Ukraine area. Phillip Barnett vision is titled the Azovmena prophecy, and he recorded and preached about the vision back in 2007 to his church members and all over Ukraine. And he also went and got a graphic artist to help him to bring to life what he saw. And this is what he saw: 8 mountainous rockets turned upside down all over eastern Ukraine on the cities that they will hit, and areas that will be safe for people to go. And most of western Ukraine will be safe, but most of eastern Ukraine will not be safe. February 24, 2022, Russian forces invaded Ukraine. They launched an invasion in the early hours of Thursday morning. President Putin issued a warning to the West, telling them not to interfere. The US, Europe, and Ukrainian officials condemned the attack, and some called for heavy sanctions on Moscow. The Institute for the Study of War produced this map on March 6 of 2022, showing the Russian-occupied Ukrainian territory areas and also the assessed Russian advances, where Russia was advancing but not necessarily in control, and most of the areas where Russia was occupying were in the eastern part of Ukraine, away from the western area. There will be 2 evacuations from Kiev. The first one will take place when the Russian army is about to occupy Kiev. The second one will come when the nuclear war between the reformed Soviet Union and the United States takes place. The reformed Soviet Union is when Russia manages to take Poland, Belarus, and all of eastern Ukraine. On March 9th of 2022, there was a short window of time for Ukrainians to evacuate from Kyiv, the capital of Ukraine. Many residents, especially in the suburbs of Ukraine's capital, made their way across slippery wooden planks of a makeshift bridge that provided the only way to escape Russian shelling amid renewed efforts to rescue civilians from besieged cities. As Russia was making its way across east of Ukraine, many of those people in those cities that Russia had besieged had time to flee. Thousands of people are thought to have been killed, both civilians and soldiers, in 2 weeks of fighting since President Vladimir Putin's forces invaded Ukraine. The UN estimates that more than 2 million people have fled the country, the biggest exodus of refugees in Europe since the end of World War II. PBS 2022. Ukraine saw the biggest decrease in population between 2022 and 2023. They had about a negative 8.1% decrease in the population because of the refugees that were fleeing from Ukraine. This is data from Statistica.com. On March 11, 2022, Joe Biden, the President of America, stated, "That's called World War III," when he was defending his decision not to send jets to Ukraine in order to help them to fight against Russian forces invading them. The idea that we're going to send in offensive equipment and have planes and tanks and trains going in with American pilots and American crews, just understand, don't kid yourself, no matter what you all say, that's called World War III, Biden told a gathering of House Democrats in Philadelphia. 4 days after issuing that statement in Philadelphia, on March 15, 2022, Biden signed a massive spending bill into law that gave billions to Ukraine. 2 months later, on May 10, 2022, the House approved $40 billion in Ukrainian aid because Biden was requesting that from the House. The new legislation will bring American support for the effort to nearly $54 billion, including the $13.6 billion in support Congress had given in March. 20 days later, on the 30th of May 2022, China sends about 30 warplanes into the China Air defense zone, escalating China-Taiwan relations. This happened days after U.S. President Joe Biden warned China against invading Taiwan, and on the same day as a U.S. official visited the island to discuss security with its leaders. China has ramped up the frequency of its air missions in recent months, claiming there are training drills. BBC 2022. In the fall of 2022, September 2nd, 2022, the White House asked Congress for $47 billion for COVID, Ukraine, monkeypox, and natural disasters. Biden officials were saying the money is for urgent priorities. Further requests for funding were likely to be met with resistance on Capitol Hill, where Republicans were generally opposed to any additional emergency, and Democrats for months had pushed to no avail for supplemental COVID-19 funding that they say is necessary to combat the virus. ABC News 2022. On September 30th, Congress approved $12 billion for Ukraine. And so since the war started in Ukraine, back in February, they were asking America for support, and Joe Biden at first was hesitant because it will escalate into World War III, and he did say that if he did send aid, arms, etc., it will be World War III. And so we can conclude that World War III did start in 2022. Ukraine did receive the $47 billion in emergency funding that Joe Biden was asking Congress for. The Ukraine Supplemental Appropriation Act of 2023 provided $47 billion in emergency funding, and the military and security assistance included $19.8 billion in authorities and associated funding to arm and equip Ukraine and NATO allies to counter Russian aggression. $6.2 billion for the Department of Defense to sustain the surge of U.S. forces and operations in Europe to respond to Russia's actions. $687 million to accelerate domestic munitions production capacity. $300 million to support the Ukrainian police and border guards effort. $126 million for the National Nuclear Security Administration for nuclear non-proliferation, counterterrorism, and counter-proliferation activities in and related to Ukraine. $105 million for the clearance of landmines and other explosive remnants of war to protect civilians and troops and allow for Ukrainian citizens to return to areas that were liberated from Russian control. $50 million to address cybersecurity threats emanating from Russia and other malign actors. Fighting one Cold War was bad enough, waging two at once would be impossible. 2 years into Joe Biden's presidency, the United States faces simultaneous diplomatic and national security crisis with its 20th century superpower rival Moscow and its top 21st century adversary China. Sun 2022. Russia had 1,747 sanctions against it in 2022. The global terror had 194 sanctions against them. Iran had 179 sanctions against it in 2022. Russia clearly received the most sanctions in 2022. As of 2025, Ukraine has received about $407 billion in aid, including $118 billion from the United States. Fighting and airstrikes have inflicted over 40,000 civilian casualties. 4 million people are internally displaced and 6.8 million have fled Ukraine. 14.6 million people need humanitarian assistance. Center for Preventive Action.